Hello, everybody, and welcome back to week 40 of tracking our shifting real estate market here in Southern New Jersey, Burlington, Camden, Gloucester counties, 900,000 and below. And this week we have a special guest who's going to be on with us, Mackenzie Dadyan with NFM Lending out of Haddonfield. So as we do here, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I just want to review the stats for this week because what we were also able to do is pull our September averages. So I want to review that quickly. And at the end of the video, we're going to chat with Mack a little bit about the state of the mortgage market and just what to be aware of as we're looking through this. So let me go ahead and bring this up real quick, and I'm just going to share my screen. But one of the things that we've been tracking, and I could even fold this out, it's so quick. So this week, let's just take a look at it. Week 40 of the year, last week of September, we finally hit the 1,400 mark for total active listings. And it's been a slow climb there since, before July, we've been climbing that inventory almost since February. So it's great to see that our inventory is ticking up slowly, but ticking up. Now, we kind of broke our golden ratio, right? Our golden ratio, we love to see the new listings the highest, pendings a little bit below that, and closed below that. And that's what's helping add that inventory back. But you can see here, we had 369 closed units and only 285 to come back on the market and deal with that. Now, there's a couple of things you would ask. It's like, well, how did we increase our total active listings while our closed was higher than our new listings, right? Wouldn't that literally mean that we retracted it? Remember, some of the things that we don't include here are what are called active under contract properties, deals that died in attorney review, which is the first 3 days. So there's a lot of wishy-washy properties that happen there, but by and large, we had a great closing number this week, some of the highest we've had since beginning of August, but still not bad. Our expired, withdrawn, and cancels did have a pretty big uptick here. There were a number of expired listings, so that's interesting to keep a note on. And again, another one that we're seeing at a pretty record high, this might be the second highest all year, was our price reductions. Another 151 listings had price reductions. So again, we talked about this trend line of this pricing that had been going up for so long, but it's capped out. And we'll get to this in a second right here about this 339, 340 type mark. But there's a lot of agents who are still pricing these listings way higher than they should. So anyway, we're going to continue to see a number of those kind of price reductions. Days on market stayed similar. But just looking at our September averages here real quick, and let me just take off, but we don't think we really need our decimal points here. So let me just move this over a little bit, and I'll add these back to the dollar signs. But basically in here, what we're looking at is our total active listings. We can see that's been increasing. We can see that our average for new listings this month in September is down from August, but we kind of expected that. The summer was a little bit busy, a little bit tapered off in the fall. We had a drop off again in the pending, and we had a drop off in close. So this whole month of September, as compared to August, has been a slower month. But again, we're past the summer. We would expect that. Now, the one that is interesting to me, and this is what we're talking about, is that the price reductions are the highest they've been since January, basically, and we know that's because of the turn of the year. And then we know, our days on market have slowly started to kind of mess around. They were pretty high at the beginning of the year, but now they've kind of come to a little bit of a stable point. August was probably our fastest month, and they've kind of slowed down a little bit here. The biggest kicker, though, and then Mac, we're going to flip this back to you, is watching these median list prices. So again, January 312, February 311, and that was like our bottom. But then March, it picked up to 317. April, we continue to rebound, 319, then 325 in May, 338 in June, 339 in July, 338 in August, and 342 here in September. So you can see these, since the summer, since that kind of June mark, we really stabilized the pricing conversation. Right, that has started to become a little bit more stable. And I think that's why that price reduction number is so high, is because you do see a lot of people kind of overpricing and then having to come back to earth. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here real quick, and let's just come back to this. So Mac, go ahead, and I want you to just introduce yourself for a second, and then I want to jump into our first question.
Thanks, Connor. So as Connor said, I'm Mack Dadyan. I am a senior loan originator with NFM Lending based out of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I have been in the business now going on 9 years now. I started as an originator, continued as an originator, and here's where we are today. Now, specifically, Connor, to kind of touch on the market in general, the big thing right now is interest rates, right? So from a lending perspective, we are the highest we've been since maybe the year 2000 in terms of rates. This past week has been a little bit of bloodbath in the markets. We're seeing average rates now pretty close to 8% on a 30-year mortgage. When I started in the business, rates were 3.75. They went up to 6, and then during the pandemic, they dropped down almost to 2.5% on a 30-year mortgage. And now fast forward a year and a half later, 18, 19 months later, that 2.5% is now 8%. The big question is why, how did this happen? How long is it going to be like this? What direction is the country going in economically based off of this? What I will say, Connor, is the biggest thing is these high rates, it's making it difficult for people to qualify. You're taking, home prices that have been increasing for the past couple of years, and now you're adding the fact that the cost to borrow towards that house has now increased your mortgage payment, in some cases, over $1,000 a month. I mean, my own personal house that I bought during the pandemic, if I bought today, my mortgage payment would be $1,700 more a month. So, why this has happened, all of this ties to the Fed, right? During the pandemic, we were giving out funds to businesses, to individuals, and that money had to be made back somehow. So coupled with that, the Federal Reserve, with their monetary policy, started raising their rate to make some of that money back and to also curb inflation. In, I want to say last year, probably around October, inflation was 8-9% in 2022. And then fast forward to this past summer, June, July, it hit 3%. I think right now it's hovering 3.74%. So what the Fed has been trying to do with raising interest rates is make everything more expensive for people. Okay. They want people to stop spending money so supply chains can catch up and inflation can come down in this country, which is essentially what it is sort of happening and going to happen over the next 24 months. Now, this is a process that it's going to take some time to get us to where we need to be. So, trying to buy a house in this market with the high interest rate, what I will say is that we do have some creative avenues to help out. One of those being a 2-1 buy down. We saw a lot of that last summer, kind of popped up. Nobody knew what it was, but essentially we are funding 2 years of the interest up front through a seller concession to allow us an interest rate for year one that's 2 points less than what the average is. And then the second year, it'll be 1 point less. So essentially, we lock you in an 8% interest rate. Year one, you're paying 6% interest rate. Year two, you're paying 7% interest rate. And then year 3 to year 30, you pay 8% interest rate. Now, the idea behind this is that you're going to refinance prior to even hitting that 8% interest rate, but the big question is, when is that actually going to happen? Projections right now are that next year, the lowest we're probably going to see for a 30-year mortgage is maybe 6.25. And then they're projecting the year after that 5.25.
So can I let me interject?
Yeah, go ahead.
The monetary policy from the Fed stuff, I think, has been a lot of people have been hearing this from their different news outlets and things like that. And not everybody needs to be a master economics proficiency to know this stuff. Just know that the government gave out a lot of money and they have to recoup it. And the interest rates are the way that they're doing that. We are the unfortunate payers of that, of what we needed. I think the thing that's sticking out to me the most is because what we always want to try and do is like, how do we translate what's going on, this messy economics, this stuff that most people honestly don't want to get in the dirty nitty gritty with, right? They want to hear what are my high level highlights, and like, what do I need to talk to my people at my dinner table with this weekend about? So I think the thing that just caught my attention there right at the end was so many of these buyers who had sat on the sidelines because of the higher interest rates said, I want to wait to buy until the rates come down, right? This stock phrase that so many people have used. And guess what? I don't think anybody has ever said the opposite. I'm going to wait to buy when the rates go up. Like, obviously, we all want to buy when the rates come down. But there needs to be a realistic expectation as to how far those rates will or can come down and in what time period. So let's address this. They're saying, and when we say they, it's as much as we can research and hear from the Fed and hear from who sets interest rates and all these different things, right? They're saying that next year we should see maybe a low of 6.25, and then the year after that, so that would be now going out to 2025, maybe get down to the 5%. From my perception here, and here's kind of the question, from my perception, that's a much slower drop in those rates than I think a lot of people were expecting. I mean, even myself, when I bought my house, my fiance, like you said, we were expecting to refinance almost by this point. It's been about a year that we've been in this house. We were expecting to already refinance. Interest rates are 1.8% higher than when I bought. So talk me through maybe, how confident do you feel? I mean, you, Mack, Dadyan, listening to this information, how confident do you feel that we should actually hit those marks? And is there any chance it might go lower than that?
So I will say something interesting, not interesting, but something historical that's going to happen next year is another election. Historically, the year of the election, overall leads to lower rates, right? So whoever is in office, they want to look as good as possible. Low crime, low rates, better way of life. So there could be a good chance that 6.25 next year is actually lower. I think the government might put a little pressure on the Fed to ensure a re-election. And as we saw during, Trump administration, him and his economic advisors were notorious for putting pressure on the Fed for keeping rates down. I think the Biden administration will most likely do the same exact thing to help, confirm that re-election. But in terms of getting any lower than 5%, I just don't think that's going to happen, because I think this, for all intents and purposes, we have been in a recession, but I don't think as many people are actually feeling it. So it's almost like this hidden recession, but a recession doesn't turn in the opposite direction and, put us back in a good place in 1 or 2 months. So I do think that for the next 2 years, we're not going to see rates lower than 5%. And I just think the cost of living is going to continue to be high. Now, back to your, people on the fence about buying now because they want an interest rate that's a little lower. We have to take into consideration is that, average appreciation, some areas being more, some areas being less, in our particular area could be somewhere around 4 or 5% a year. Now, a $400,000 house, that means that next year, all things remaining equal, you're spending $420 on that house. Now let's add into the fact that we have an inventory issue, that rates are still staying high, that people with 2.5%, 3% interest rates are on the fence about listing their house because they're like, why would I move? Why would I move, get a 7, 6, 8% interest rate, and my payment's $1,500 higher, and I'm getting the same exact house? So I think we're going to continue to have an inventory issue over the next couple of years. So all that means is that person that waited for the rate to drop a point, 2 points because they wanted to save, let's say $500 a month, now could be potentially buying that same house for 40, 50 grand more a year or 2 years later. So right now rates are not ideal. And I'm not saying rush into buy. If you can't qualify for what you want, you can't buy a house. But if it's merely just a preference, that you just would rather have a lower interest rate, my recommendation would be to go out and purchase a house now before you pay more for it a year later, 2 years later.
Yeah. And I think here's a thread I want to start pulling on with you a little bit, because this is a big conversation, right? When you take a first-time buyer who doesn't have a home to sell, it's almost an easier conversation because they don't know any better, right? How much has been coming out of their budget from housing beforehand is zero, or a rent payment, which we know is probably a little overinflated from an affordability standpoint for what you could get. But they just accept it because they're just like, okay, I'm just going to start paying to own my first home. And there's sort of like a I want to own my first home tax that they're willing to pay from an affordability standpoint. I think the problem of why this inventory crisis has really continued as long as it has, especially for our area, right? Different areas of the country are different. Colorado is different than California, is different than Texas, is different than Idaho, right? We're here, Southern New Jersey, the major 3 counties outside of Philly, built out areas, and a lot of people have owned for a while. But now you have the conversation. So here's the tee up for you. You have 2 different buyers, right? You have a buyer who's just coming in, doesn't own anything. They're willing to kind of jump on this 8% interest rate. They almost have no issue with it because it's almost like they don't know any better. Not saying badly, just in a blissful ignorance way. But then you have the seller, and that's the kicker. I have a seller right now who owns a $300,000 home, and they would love to move up to the $500,000 home. But going from 300 to 500A, they're not even getting that bigger of a house at this point, because when they had bought it versus, what they're going for, the interest rate is so much higher. And it's that now I have to say, I used to spend $2,000 a month on housing, and now I have to spend $3,700 on housing, and I'm barely getting a marginal increase in my quality of life. How do you as a lender talk maybe differently, maybe similarly or differently to those two different scenarios? So just what are some of the things that come to mind you right there that you would want to address with either of those people?
Sure. So for one, obviously the easier person to address it to is a first-time home buyer. Because if you're paying rent right now, your interest rate is 100%. So 8% versus 100% sounds pretty good to me, and you get something out of it. You're building equity in a property that you're going to be able to take out a line of credit down the road, pull that money and go buy more properties to build actual wealth for you and your family. So that conversation, I think, is much easier. With the person that currently owns a home, that's definitely a more difficult conversation, simply because, again, they in many cases don't need to move. It's not a necessity. It's more of a want. It's more of a desire. And from a financial standpoint, the numbers are the numbers. It's going to cost you an extra $1,700 a month. What you have to assess is, what is important to you. And that's really what I touch on. Like, normally I'm a numbers guy, right? I'm a mortgage guy. I pre-approve you and I give you numbers and we talk about numbers. In those cases with people that are looking to sell, I run projections based off of 2 years and then 5 or 6 years. So how this conversation could happen is, yes, it's $1,700 more a month. Okay. But let me ask you this. If you paid, let's say, 30-40 grand over the next 2 years, and then in year 3, rates dropped to 3%, your payment went to this, and you built up X amount of equity, now you're in X neighborhood, and your kids are now going to this much better school district, or, you're closer to the golf course because you like to golf, how would that look like in your life? I feel like you have to, for the people on the fence about selling, there's not a whole lot we can do with the numbers right now with where the rates are at. You have to make the decision to project yourself in the future and decide, is this more of a longer term play than short term? Because I think that's the only way it's really going to make sense to you to take on that extra $1,700. Because if you're just moving for a year or two to take on that $1,700 payment, doesn't make sense. But if this is a second home that you're getting, I think 100% it makes sense. Because numbers wise, average appreciation every single year, ability to refinance 2 years, 3 years down the road, money wise, it all levels out. So,
Let me ask you this for this, and we're going to kind of come to the end here. Let's say I'm a seller and I've built up, let's say, $100,000 equity in my current home, and I do want to do the trade to the next property and things like that. But I'm sitting here cushy at a 2.75% interest rate on this my current property where I have the $100,000 in equity, and the next property I want to buy, it's going to be at 8%. A lot of sellers are going to want to take that equity from their primary, roll it into the purchase of their next home in order to defer capital gains taxes, things like that, and also just try and put a large amount down so they can reduce their overall loan amount. Have you seen anybody who wants to now, instead of just taking that entire equity and applying it as down payment, they're taking a portion of that equity in order to buy points? Have you seen that?
Yes. So,
and I guess what's the trade-off? What's better? Like, do you just go all down payment to just get the loan amount down as much as you can? Or does it make sense to take maybe 10,000 of that, only use 90,000 as a down payment, take that 10,000 and buy the rate down as much? Like, in your opinion, as kind of you've seen, ballpark number of me, but like, which method, or is there a sweet spot? Like, what do you recommend there?
Yeah. So, two-part answer. First, my recommendation is always put the money towards other debt and down payment. So if we're just strictly speaking the house, that $10,000, I would just put it towards the down payment. Because if $10,000 on a $500,000 house, you're paying 2 percentage points, and that might bring your interest rate down 0.5 point. So that break-even point, it's going to be multiple years down the road. You're probably going to end up refinancing before you actually end up saving on that interest monthly. Because, right, you put $10K up front, let's say that saves you $300 a month, $200 a month, okay? You're not actually saving $200 or $300 a month until you've recouped that $10,000 you put up front at closing. So unfortunately in this market with how bad the secondary market is, a lot of loan options for a somewhat decent rate has some form of additional point cost to it. But aside from the minimum that's needed, I wouldn't spend too much on the points. What I would do instead with that 10 grand is potentially tackle credit cards. Because what I've seen some credit cards with a $2,000-$3,000 balance with 25% interest monthly. You should take that 10 grand and pay that off. Or if you don't have credit cards, I would just put it towards principal and just wait for the time to refinance down the road. Because also too, your refinance cost is going to be increasing your principal balance by 10 grand, 12 grand, 13 grand in closing costs. So that would be my recommendation right there. And then secondary, we do have an option for customers. It's our Knock Equity program that essentially is an equity advance on your current residence. So, you don't have to buy and sell on the same day. So essentially we pull the equity from your house, gets wired to you 4 days before you buy the new house, and you can put that money towards the purchase and down payment on the new house. And you have 6 months to sell your house and recoup, the remaining money and pay whatever cost was associated with that program that we have as well too. So
that is definitely a theme I've seen a lot, especially in this competitive market. And I think this really bore itself out over COVID was that, sellers were really not looking at contingent buyers, right? And being a contingent buyer meant you're not a buyer, right? You are not. So the program that you just mentioned there is that way to almost like a bridge loan, almost like just a gap to get you from one to B. And I think the thing that maybe somebody would have that's a concern is like, okay, I go and buy this new house. You've taken this line out. What if I can't sell my property? Obviously, there's an analysis that goes into this. The realtors help with some of this. You help with some of this. You're only doing this with a margin of error, right? There's a margin of error to be able to do this. And you're never pulling out, I would imagine, you're probably not pulling against 100% of the equity that they own in the property. There's a cap, maybe it's 75% or 80% of what that equity is. So even if you sold it for slightly less than what maybe your realtor is discussing or what you guys have talked about as fair market value, you're still probably going to be okay. And again, in this market, especially if you're doing it in this area, these homes are selling. These homes are selling quick. We've been tracking this stuff, right? I mean, it's a little bit slower than it's been, but it's still fast in the scheme of, it's really still our days on market, our median days on market is still like 22, with the average at like 57, with those couple that sit for 1,000 days. But really, the average is still, median is still close to a month, a little less than a month, right? That's the most, right? And if you have an attractive listing and things like that, it's only going to increase that speed. So, Mac, if anybody would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way they can reach out?
They could call my direct line, 856-813-0475. You can email me as well too at mdadyan@nfmlending.com.
Perfect. And we'll make sure we throw that information in the email if you're receiving it via that, as well as in the YouTube link if you want to grab it on there. So anyway, Mac, that's going to do it for us here. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording, but I appreciate everybody here. Week 40, we're officially getting into October. We're getting into spooky season, and it's spooky in the real estate market, but let's hope not too spooky. So, all right, y'all, have a great day.